Global warming, climate change, melting glaciers, rising sea levels. We've heard these almost cliché slogans a million times, but are we really paying attention to their severe implications for our survival on this planet? It doesn't seem that way when polls show that approximately half of the global population is either completely unaware or doesn't believe that climate change poses a serious threat to humanity's future. Here are 7 indisputable facts about climate change that even the staunchest denier will not be able to contradict. With average temperatures being the key words here, the planet has experienced 20 of the warmest years on record since 1981, and 10 of the warmest years in the last 12. If we continue at this exact rate, a 2.6 to 4.8 degree rise is expected by the end of the century. But what's the big deal? It's just a few degrees and still snows in the winter in a lot of places, deniers will say. The big deal is that a 4-degree global temperature change is the difference between the Earth's current state and an ice age. The fact that it still snows in the winter in some places means nothing on the grand scheme of global climate. That's why it's more correct to say climate change instead of global warming, because warming is not the universal effect of climate change. Anyone who's actually gone to the North or South Pole and come back with images like these will tell you that there's absolutely no doubt that permafrost on this planet is not so permanent anymore. Glaciers are retreating almost everywhere around the world, including the Alps, Himalayas, Andes, Rockies, Alaska, and Africa. But it's just a natural process since the Earth goes through cycles, deniers will say. Those who claim that the Earth has been naturally and gradually getting warmer for millions of years need to look no further than a few correlation charts from just recent decades to see that the overall temperature increase is neither gradual nor natural. Global sea levels have risen 17 centimeters over the last 150 years. This may not seem like a lot, but the rate at which this happened over the last decade is nearly double that of the entire century preceding it. But we don't know for certain that ocean levels will continue to rise or the rate at which they'll do so, deniers will say. We know that they'll continue to rise precisely because of its current speed compared to the past. Also, it's just basic science. If you take a glass full of solid ice and a glass with ice that has already melted a little bit, the ice cubes immersed in water will continue to melt and will do so faster than the solid ones. We'll come back to these glasses a bit later. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of the surface of ocean waters has increased by about 30%. This increase is the result of more carbon dioxide being emitted into the atmosphere, and hence more of it being absorbed into the oceans at a rate of about 2 billion tons per year. But why does the slightest difference in the ocean pH even matter, deniers will say? It matters because all marine life is impacted by the pH balance in the ocean waters. And we're not just talking about fish here, we're talking about our entire food chain. Since 1950, the number of record high temperature events around the globe has been increasing, while the number of record low temperature events has been decreasing. There has also been an increase in the numbers of heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. For instance, the Sahara Desert is enlarging at a rate of 48 kilometers per year. But there have always been extreme weather events, deniers will say. Of course, but the frequency with which they are happening is undeniably higher. Heat waves that previously happened once every 3 years are now happening every 200 days. The Earth's atmosphere acts like a blanket, and adding more CO2 to it makes that blanket thicker. And what keeps that CO2 in the atmosphere? The answer is greenhouse gases, the majority of which are emitted by human activity. But carbon dioxide is not so bad in itself. We breathe it out ourselves, deniers will say. Carbon dioxide itself isn't bad. Water is also not bad, but too much water will kill you, right? I think this one speaks for itself. But a lot of scientists say there's not enough evidence, deniers will say. That is simply not true. No one in the climate science community is debating whether or not changes in atmospheric CO2 concentrations alter the greenhouse effect, or if the current warming trend is faster than ever in recorded history, or if sea levels have risen over the last century. The only debate is perhaps about the consequences of all this. So, what exactly are the projected consequences? Well, let's start with those glaciers. Remember the ice cubes? The ones that were stacked on top of each other remain virtually unchanged. But the ones that had already started melting, well, they're almost all gone now. They've almost melted through the course of this presentation. Much like this, if, or rather when, all those glaciers melt, here's what would happen to the coastal areas we currently all know. Here is Europe, North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Of course, this is a very slow and gradual process, but the impact of rising sea levels can already be seen today. The concept of climate refugees already exists, while a number of small islands in the Pacific, including the Maldives, are now under threat from rising sea levels. If you live somewhere inland, do not be fooled, because everything on Earth is interconnected. Apart from extreme weather events in inland areas, the projected climate refugee crisis could be so big that the remaining habitable areas of the planet might not be able to cope economically, politically, or physically. It would create utter chaos, and Darwin's concept of survival of the fittest would have to prevail once again. Except that in our world, the fittest are actually the richest, not the physically strong. All this paints a very bleak picture for our global future. If we want to avoid this future, we need to make some drastic changes to the way we live on this planet today. Please spread this message, because the first step toward change is awareness. The least we can do at the individual level is reduce the statistic of ignorance. There may still be time, but very soon it might simply be too late.